if you got something out of it, there's more to get out of it, and if you didn't get anything out of it, well, don't let me cloud the issue. There is something there. One of the key verses is that is Romans chapter 3 and verse 20, I think it is, or no, it's past 28, so 30, where it talks about us being justified through faith and the circumcision being justified by faith. And even though I taught all that, I didn't get to the concluding verse last week, and I'm not going to go back there. We're in Hebrews chapter 11. Let's move forward. In fact, it's better to move forward because this does get quite a bit moving ahead in Hebrews and really becomes very practical. It will become dispensational as we look at it a little bit closer than maybe other people have. But Hebrews chapter 11 is called the faith chapter of the Bible. And after it began with a definition of faith, then it moves on to, I didn't pull my right notes out. It moved ahead to talk about men of the faith. And I didn't even count exactly how many men there were. I started counting through the chapter how many different testimonies are given. But we played around a little bit in verse 4, but let's cover it properly. Hebrews 11:4, it says, "By faith Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, by which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and by it he being dead yet speaketh." Now the reason that it's saying by faith is because Israel, when you read the book of Hebrews, and if you've been with us in previous studies, Israel is facing a trial of faith. When we were going through chapter 10, and it was talking about that final sacrifice for sin, and the once all-sufficient sacrifice for sin, that in verse 26 of chapter 10, it gave a warning that if a person would sin willfully, and that is to turn down this message of God, that there is no more sacrifice for sin. There's nothing but judgment for that person. And the reason why is the book of Hebrews is looking forward because the next event on the Jewish program, and the book of Hebrews is written to the Jews, the next event in God's program for the nation of Israel is a great trial of faith. And for them to turn away from the faith at this point and not to believe the faith would be to be eternally damned. Because if they don't take Jesus Christ as the final sacrifice for sin, they will turn back to idol worship, and they will be right into the hands of the Antichrist. When you look at chapter 10 and verse 36, verse 35, it says, "Cast not away therefore your confidence, which hath a great recompense of reward." So the warning as he finished chapter 10 is that now that they've come to some understanding, don't cast it away. There's great reward if they'll wait a while. Verse 36, "For ye have need of patience, that after ye have done the will of God, ye might receive the promise. For yet a little while, and he that shall come will come, and will not tarry." See, they're looking for Jesus Christ to return, and that's when they're going to be blessed of God. So don't cast away their confidence about the coming of Jesus Christ and the kingdom that He's going to establish with them. He says in verse 38 of chapter 10, he says, "Now the just shall live by faith, but if any man draw back, my soul hath no pleasure in him. But we are not of them who draw back unto perdition, but unto them that believe to the saving of the soul." So they're not drawing back unto perdition. They're going to believe unto the saving of the soul, because salvation in the Jewish program comes at the second coming of Jesus Christ when He establishes the kingdom. This is not the message of grace, in which today when you believe you are saved. This is the message to the Jews about the salvation that's coming to them at the second coming of Jesus Christ. But those statements about drawing back unto perdition, this is what the Hebrew writer is telling them not to do, and that's why when it said in verse 38, "Now the just shall live by faith," the faith that he's talking about throughout chapter 11 is the faith to do what God said to them, and that has to do with doing some enduring until Christ comes back, not drawing back, not casting away, not turning down the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, but holding that faith until Christ comes back. And so these illustrations show that people did some things out of faith, not just believe some things. Their faith called on them to do something. And so verse 4 says, "By faith Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain." Now that more excellent sacrifice, I think we've taken the time to show that the sacrifice is the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, the cross. There's no there is a reason why it's talking about a more excellent sacrifice here, just after he's talked about the sacrifice that Jesus Christ made. That even though Abel offered an animal sacrifice, it was more excellent than that of Cain in that he did what God said. And for the Hebrews to do what God said in the book of Hebrews is to look at Jesus Christ as that sacrifice. And that is the more excellent sacrifice. In fact, we've talked about this being a theme of Hebrews. Just walk this through with me. Go back to Hebrews chapter 1. And as it began to talk about Jesus Christ, and to show that Jesus Christ is better than the old way Israel used to approach God, the first thing that it said about Jesus Christ, Hebrews chapter 1 verse 4, it says, being made so much better than the angels, as he hath by inheritance obtained a more excellent name than they. So Jesus Christ is more excellent than the angels. He excels in his perfection above the angels because he indeed is God, and that's what chapter 1 went on to present. Come over with me to chapter 8, verse 6. Talking about Jesus Christ being better than the law. It says in chapter 8, verse 6, it says, but now he hath obtained a more excellent ministry, by how much more also he is the mediator of a better covenant, which is established upon better promises. He, as a minister, as a high priest of the nation of Israel, he's more excellent than what they've had before, in that he has a better ministry as their high priest. So that when you come now to chapter 11, verse 4, and it's talking about talking about Abel offering unto God a more excellent sacrifice, the parallel there is to realize Jesus Christ in the present day is the more excellent sacrifice that Cain's sacrifice only is a type of, Abel's sacrifice is only a type of. So verse 4 says, by faith Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, by which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and by it he being dead yet speaketh. Let's go back to the book of Genesis, chapter 4, and let's see why God is saying that Abel by faith offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice. That's Genesis chapter 4. Genesis chapter 4 verse 1, it says, and you're just starting out with those that came from Adam and Eve, it says, and Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived, and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. And again she bare his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. In the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. And Abel, he also brought of the firstlings of his flock, and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel, and to his offering. But unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. Now, when you read back here, all you're reading is that there's a process of time, and they each brought an offering to the Lord. Cain was a tiller of the ground, so he brings the best of his crops, the fruit of the ground. Abel, he was a keeper of sheep, and he brought of the first thing of the flock, and of the fat thereof, which is quite interesting. Fat burning on a sacrifice is a sweet-smelling savor to God. Pastor Jordan came one time and preached a message on fat is beautiful. Everyone died and he wanted to get skinny, you know. But anyhow, you notice the attention given to the fat thereof. But what he brought, the Bible gives a testimony and says that unto Abel and to his offering. It says, and the Lord to Abel and to his offering. Now you and I wouldn't know why there, except that we realize that in this passage God is definitely teaching what pleases him as far as offerings go. That the fruit of the ground does not please him. That what pleases him is something that requires blood sacrifice. Something that later on in the book of Leviticus you find out that is what God has given to be put on the altar as an atonement for the soul. And without the shedding of blood, the book of Hebrews says, there is no forgiveness of sins. That God desired that. What you don't know, and some speculated by when Adam and Eve sinned, that they took fig leaves and sewed them together and tried to cover their nakedness, tried to cover their sin. But that wasn't sufficient with God, because you look over in chapter 3 of Genesis, and it says in verse 21, it says, "Unto Adam also and to his wife did the Lord make coats of skins and clothe them." When God wanted them covered, He didn't grab more fig leaves and say, "We need to shore up a little bit your clothing that you made." He actually went out and He shed an animal's blood, so that the skin of that animal could be a covering to the nakedness of Adam and Eve. And there's a demonstration there that it takes a sin offering to cover sins. Now, if it's not just presented there, one of the things that I used to look at this and try to think that they really didn't know what to bring, and now they're just now learning that. It was Bob Schuller years ago who heard me teach that, who said, no, that's not the way it happened. They knew God had told them to bring an animal, perhaps a lamb, but to bring a blood sacrifice to put on that altar as an offering unto the Lord. And I'm looking at it, I don't see it there in Genesis 4, but Bob referred me to where we're studying, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 4, where it says, "By faith Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice." When it says by faith, what is faith? We've studied it for 2 or 3 weeks now. It's believing, doing what God says to do. And for faith, for Abel to offer unto God what is being called the more excellent sacrifice, and to do it by faith, he was doing what God said to do. Apparently, God had told them, and they knew what kind of offering to bring to the Lord. And because Cain was a tiller of the ground, he thought, well, why should I go get a sheep from my brother's flock and offer that to God, when look what I have done, it's just as good as what my brother has done. I'm going to offer to God what I think is the very best that I could offer Him. And he brought the fruit of the ground and offered it to the Lord, and the Lord did not have respect unto Cain, nor did He have respect to his offering. And the reason that God didn't have respect to the person first is because the person didn't bring what God said to bring. So his heart was wrong in the first place, and the offering was wrong in the second place. Abel brought what he brought because that's what God said to bring. So God had respect unto Abel first, and then unto the offering that Abel brought secondly, because Abel brought it out of faith. Going back just a little bit to Genesis chapter 4, when it became clear that God did not have respect unto what Cain offered to God, Cain does something that I think most people do. And they do it in a different way, hopefully, but they do the same thing. In verse 6 it says, "And the Lord said unto Cain, Why art thou wroth, and why is thy countenance fallen?" They get mad when they find out that God isn't pleased by what they did. Instead of saying, "Oh, what is it that you want, Lord? I'll do whatever you want." Instead of finding out what God really wants, they get mad that God isn't going to accept what they're doing, and they rebel rather than submit to God's word. And so in verse 7 it says, "If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door, and unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him." There seems to me an offer by God in verse 7 that if thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted. All right, you've made a mistake. Don't get mad about it. Now you know what to bring. But rather than Cain repenting and changing his mind and saying, "Okay, I realize now, Lord, you didn't care what I think you should get. You really meant what you said. I should give you what you want." Instead of doing that, when God gives him another opportunity, verse 8 it says, "And Cain walked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass, when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and slew him." And so he just get rid of the righteous testimony in the earth. And so that was his answer to God, and from here he's going to be a vagabond and a fugitive, driven out from the presence of God, because of the way that he handled what God said to him. But the testimony of faith, in Hebrews chapter 11 verse 4, is that by faith Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice. It was better than Abel's in that it was what God wanted.
What did God say to Abel? It doesn't really say. I don't think. How did he know it? God didn't expect it. In vision?
Oh yeah, probably fire didn't come down from heaven and consume the sacrifice. At least, I don't know if it happened in every situation like that, but there is testimony through Like when Israel first built their altar and all, that fire came down and consumed it, and they realized God was pleased with it. I don't know if that happened here or not, but there was a way that they did know.
God was speaking directly to them.
I don't know. Was? Oh, yeah, okay. All right, yeah.
Was that the Father or the Son?
It would be the Son, probably. No man has seen the Father at any time. Yeah. Okay. So you have a testimony here of Abel offering unto God a more excellent sacrifice. Remember, the teaching here is for the nation of Israel to realize they have just been offered a more excellent sacrifice. That the blood of bulls and goats, according to Hebrews 10:4, could never take away sin. But the blood of Jesus Christ perfectly dealt with the sin problem that they had. And so Jesus Christ is that more excellent sacrifice. For them to turn down Jesus Christ and go back to animal sacrifices would be to go the way of Cain. Because it's no longer the way God is saying to come. The way God is now saying for them to come is through Jesus Christ. When it says over there in Hebrews 11:4, it says, by faith Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, by which he obtained witness that he was righteous. Now, where is the witness that Abel is righteous? Well, is it not Genesis chapter 4? That, especially look at the rest of how that's saying that. It says, by which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gift. Well, that's God inspiring Moses to write down what he does in Genesis chapter 4, that he had respect unto Abel and to his sacrifice. God gave testimony concerning the righteous heart of Abel and the faith that Abel had in offering the sacrifice. And so, if that's what that verse is talking about, when you get to the end of the verse, it says, and by it, he being dead, yet speaketh. I used to always look at that verse and think, what that's saying is he has eternal life, and that he is yet alive somewhere. You know, he's with the Lord. And that, I believe that to be true, but I don't think that's what the verse is saying anymore. When it says that, by which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and by it, God's testimony of his gifts, he being dead yet speaketh. Abel's testimony still speaks, doesn't it? It's preserved forever in God's Word. Generation after generation hears about the faith of Abel because God recorded it in his eternal Word, and even though it's been, 4,000 years ago, he's still speaking. His testimony still speaks as someone who by faith did what God said and pleased God because he did that. God testified of his gift, and so his testimony is still speaking. Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's an interesting thought. Who said something? Roger? Oh, you saw the crying from the ground? Yeah, that's kind of strange. It's crying for justice. The earth does that several times. When there's injustice in the land, part of God is purging the land is because of the ground is polluted by man's sin. Roger? Yeah. Yeah. There's one more thing before we leave verse 4, and that is the testimony. I tried to make application not only to Israel right there concerning the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, but there's also going to be a temptation for the nation of Israel in the future, as they're going to be tried, whether they're going to go the more excellent way, to stand for the truth of Jesus Christ being that way, and not be tempted to go back. Come with me to 1 John. Just a couple references here to show you what Israel's facing, the decision, the example that they can learn here, and to follow the testimony of Abel, and to be careful that they don't follow the testimony of Cain. 1 John chapter 3. It says, 1 John 3:11, it says, for this is the message that ye have heard from the beginning, that we should love one another, not as Cain, who was of that wicked one, and slew his brother. And wherefore slew he him? Because his own works were evil, and his brother's righteous. Marvel not, my brethren, if the world hate you. The nation of Israel, for a Jewish person, now, but more so when the trial of their faith is going to come, when Israel again has a temple, when the sacrifices are established, and the priesthood is operating again, for a Jew to say, no, I'm not going to the temple, I'm not offering any more animal sacrifices, I'm not approaching God through Moses, I'm going to approach God through Jesus Christ, the more excellent sacrifice. That they are going to be hated, not only of the world, they're going to be hated of their own brethren. And they will be persecuted because in the tribulation, there's going to be a cooperation with the land of Israel, the leaders of Israel, with the Antichrist. And you read about that in the book of Daniel, and they will be persecuted, and just like Cain killed Abel, they will be killed of their own countrymen for standing for the testimony of Jesus Christ. Come over with me to Jude, the book before the book of Revelation. So that his testimony yet speaketh, not only yet speaketh, but yet guideth the nation of Israel in what they're going to be facing and the dilemma that they face. Jude chapter 1, well, there's only one chapter. Jude verse 11 says, let me start in verse 8 just so you get a little bit of the context. Sodom and Gomorrah is mentioned before this. It says in verse 8, it says, likewise also these filthy dreamers defile the flesh, despise dominion, speak evil of dignitaries. Yet Michael, the archangel, when contending with the devil, he disputed about the body of Moses, does not bring against him a railing accusation, but said, the Lord rebuke thee. But these speak evil of those things which they know not. But what they know naturally as brute beasts, in those things they corrupt themselves. Woe unto them! For they have gone the way of Cain, and ran greedily after the error of Balaam for reward, and perished in the gainsaying of Korah. He takes 3 Old Testament things there. He talks about the way of Cain. The way of Cain was not the way of God, was it? It was not the way of faith. It was what they wanted, what he wanted, rather than what God wanted. The error of Balaam. Balaam was a prophet of God who was bought off for money. And the Antichrist has got the mark of the beast to buy off anybody who could speak for God but could be persuaded by money to go against God. And perished in the gainsaying of Korah. That is speaking against what God said. That's blasphemy. And there's going to be those tendencies as the Jews are going to face a trial of their faith, but the way of Cain is talked about. And the way of Cain, even today, the way of Cain is rather than someone coming, even in the age of grace, and be saved the way God said to be saved, they say, oh, I think that we're saved this way, or I think that God will accept me as I am, or I think that if I've done this, this, and this, then God's pleased with that. Well, their way is the way of Cain. There's nothing new about someone going to do it their own way. That's what the first person born in the world did. He did it his own way, and God's not interested in man's own way. God gives the way of salvation. And the way of salvation is through the blood of the Lord Jesus Christ by faith in what Christ done for us, and it's received as a gift to us on the basis of faith. And when people go against that and think there's another way, whatever other way it is, it's the way of Cain. And so they're warned about that. See, you have something to say? Oh, I thought a hand go up. Go back to Hebrews chapter 11. It says in verse 5, it's given another testimony. Now these testimonies are given to show Israel that by faith they can do what God's asked them to do. And they got some heroes to look back at. But there's lessons in all that's being said as well. Verse 5 says, by faith Enoch was translated, that he should not see death, and was not found because God had translated him. But before his translation he had this testimony that he pleased God. But without faith it is impossible to please him. For he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. So when you look at Enoch, get the idea, first of all, by faith Enoch was translated. So there's something that Enoch did in his faith that God ended up translating him. And when you talk about translating him here, you're talking about that God took him away from the earth. That he wasn't found because God took him into the heavens. God translated him from the earth, or It doesn't say into the heavens, but he took him away. He wasn't found. They looked for him, and he wasn't here anymore because God took him. And translated means to change his position, to move him, transport, to carry over. And Enoch was removed from the earth. He wasn't here any longer. God took him. Now, what did Enoch do? Well, before we even go back and look at his life, we know he believed God, don't we? I mean, that's the whole emphasis of this passage, that he pleased God. By faith, Enoch was translated. Well, what did he do by faith? Well, he did whatever God said to him, he did, or by faith, he believed. And the point is that what he did pleased God. So that by believing God is the way that God is pleased. That's why those verses are together. He believed what God said. And in fact, when you look at verse 6, it says, without faith it's impossible to please him. For he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he's a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. I get the idea that not only Enoch believed what God said about him, he came to the Lord and diligently sought the Lord. That's expressed in a different way. Come back to Genesis chapter 5. And there's a beautiful statement back here. Genesis chapter 5 and verse, it names the heritage before him, begins with him in verse 21. It says, and Enoch lived 65 years and begot Methuselah. And Enoch walked with God after he begot Methuselah 300 years and begot 300 years and begot sons and daughters. And all the days of Enoch were 365. And Enoch walked with God and was not, for God took him. And that's all you got in the Old Testament, is just that little statement there. But twice it's talked about that it says there in verse 24, and Enoch walked with God after he... that's where he took him. So that's the second place. The first place is up in 22. Enoch walked with God after he begot Methuselah. Then there's another testimony in verse 24, and Enoch walked with God and was not, for God took him. Somebody teaching one time was trying to express the fact that Enoch did not get taken away from the earth. He did not disappear, that he actually died, and like Moses, he was carried away and God buried him somewhere. And I listened to that guy preach that, and I thought, oh yeah, he was trying to show how words can mean that. And he almost had me convinced until someone or I remembered Hebrews chapter 11 in verse 5 when it says, by faith Enoch was translated. And it goes on to say that he should not see death. That teacher was actually saying contrary to Hebrews chapter 11. Almost convinced me of it. And I say that to you to watch out when someone tells you something you got an obscure story here. And so someone can manipulate some words and what looks like happened, maybe it didn't really happen that way. But if you got another passage of Scripture that makes it clear that he didn't see death, then you realize you got to believe God's word rather than that man. But Hebrews 11:5, by faith Enoch was translated that he should not see death, and was not found because God had translated him. God took him. He was taken away. God took him, and for his own purpose. And I'm not sure I understand everything about that, but God took him. And why did God take him? Well, he had this testimony that he pleased God, and without faith, it's impossible to please God. So if you kind of look at what it says there in 22 and 24, that he walked with God, and then look at the testimony of Hebrews chapter 5, how by faith he was translated because he pleased God. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. You kind of put those statements together, and you begin to understand to walk with God is to believe God, which pleases God, which is to walk in faith. If you just kind of take the believing part and the walking part, this man walked in faith. And walking in faith means whatever God said, he believed, and he lived his life that way. Now God said something to him, and that's the question here. What did God say to Enoch? Well, the clue to that is in verse 22. As first of all, it says in chapter 5, back to chapter 5 of Genesis. In verse 21, it says, Enoch lived 60 and 5 years, and begot Methuselah. and Enoch walked with God after he begot Methuselah. There's a statement there that seems to indicate something about Methuselah and when the walk with God began for Enoch. And what God said to Enoch we don't have here, except that we see that connection with Methuselah, and after he begat Methuselah, he walked with God the rest of his life. Now, someone has pointed out to me that the name Methuselah means something to this effect. When he dies, it shall come. Now, I can't verify that, by the way. I've tried in the Strongs, but that's about the limit that I have for Hebrew. And I have some harder works to study, but it's real tough to dig out some of the meanings, because what they do is they'll talk about the person rather than the meaning of his name. But what I'm going to demonstrate to you is I believe his name means something like that. And I can show you from the passage itself, in the sense that he walked with God. He names his son Methuselah, and let's just suppose for a moment that Methuselah does mean, when he dies, it shall come. So that Enoch, he names his son, when he dies, it shall come, and all of a sudden this guy Enoch gets real close to God. So something is going to come when Enoch dies, or when Methuselah dies. Well, let's do a little math here. Look down in verse 25. It says, and Methuselah lived 187 years and begot Lamech. Now, we're looking at Methuselah and how long he lived. Now, his life's not over. He lived 187 years and begot his son, right? Then the next verse, or at least following his son, look down to verse 28. It says, and Lamech lived 182 years and begot a son and called his name Noah. So Lamech lives 182 years. Now you got Methuselah, he's 187 years old. He has Lamech. Lamech becomes 182, and he has a son named Noah. So we're looking, here's Enoch. He has Methuselah. By the way, you know what's interesting? Lamech, when he was 54 years old, that's when Adam died. Adam died when Lamech, Noah's dad, was 54 years old. Had plenty of time to learn all about creation and tell Noah about it so Noah could bring it on the other side of the flood. You can study Genesis 5 and come up with that. But that's interesting. But when he was 82 years old, Noah was born. Now, look over with me to chapter 7 of Genesis. And look at verse 6. Chapter 7, verse 6. Genesis 7, 6. Verse 5 it says, and Noah did according unto all that the Lord commanded him. And verse 6 says, and Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters was upon the earth. So Noah lived 600 years when until the flood came, right? Is that right? You see Methuselah was 187, got Lamech. Lamech was 182, got Noah. Noah was 600 years old, and the flood came. So you add that up, you got 969 years from the time Methuselah was born until the flood came, there was 969 years, right? Look at verse 27. Back to chapter 5. Verse 27. And all the days of Methuselah was 969 years, and what? And he died. When he dies, it shall come. Now, if you had a son, and God told you, when your son dies, I'm going to destroy the world, do you think you get close to God? Now, something else, just to add to that, come back to the book of Jude again. There's something else that you learn from the New Testament about this man, Enoch. It says, it's talking about we already read up to verse 12, or verse 11, so let me continue at verse 12. Talking about those that are going the wrong way. the way of Cain and the error of Balaam and the gainsaying of Korah. It says in Jude, verse 12, it says, "These are spots in your feasts of charity, when they feast with you, feeding themselves without fear. Clouds are they without water, carried about with winds, trees whose fruit withereth, without fruit, twice dead, plucked up by the roots. Raging waves of the sea, foaming out their own shame, wandering stars to whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. And Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000 of his saints, to execute judgment upon all, to convince all that are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds which they have ungodly committed, and of all their hard speeches which ungodly sinners have spoken against him." Enoch was a prophet of God, telling people about their ungodliness and the judgment that God is going to pour out. Enoch, right, when you read the book of Jude, Jude is telling you that Enoch was a prophet who was telling people about God's judgment that was going to fall in his day. But because he's a prophet, he is also, there's reference in Jude, he's not talking about the judgment of God in Enoch's day. Jude is talking about the judgment of God that's yet to come. That the writer of Hebrews is writing to the Hebrew people and say, hey, remember Enoch? By faith he was translated. And he talked about the faith of Enoch because the book of Hebrews is warning the Jewish people that there is a judgment of God that's coming. And Enoch, when he talked about the Lord coming with 10,000 of his saints, he's not only talking about him coming and judging the world with a flood, but there's a second part of his prophecy that has to do with the second coming of Jesus Christ, who is going to again come into this world and judge this world with fire at the second coming. No longer going to judge it with a flood of water, but he is going to come and judge it with fire. And so there's a testimony about Enoch who prophesied about a judgment to come. But what he did in light of that judgment, did he draw back unto perdition? Or did he by faith get real close to God? And God rewarded his efforts. The testimony to the nation of Israel in the book of Hebrews is that as this day approaches, you need to get closer and closer to God and walk in faith of what God said, and don't walk contrary to what God said. And as you're closer to God and walk with God in what he had said, you'll make it through the tribulation that's to come. So the testimony there is for them to see what Enoch did by faith. Can't hardly help but see, and I don't give this as I have trouble not making an application to the rapture. Don't you? I have a tremendous difficulty because, and I say that to you honestly, because I don't believe that there is a testimony of the rapture in Genesis chapter 5. It was a mystery hidden God. But I will say this, and because it helps me, and if it is of any assistance to you, and that is sometimes when I think about the rapture and think about how I think it's going to take place, it gets so hocus pocus like that you say, well, I don't know, everybody's going to disappear from the earth. We're going to get translated into heaven, caught up to be with the Lord, and you're going to be driving down the street in your car, and boom, you're gone. And when sometimes you think with your own human mind, now I believe that's how the Bible, when it says a twinkling of an eye, it's going to happen just that quick. So the scenario does seem to match the way Scripture says. But when it seems in the rational human mind, we don't see God, especially doing miraculous things in the age of grace, we start thinking that maybe we're just kind of inventing a fairy story. Until you do look back and you do have testimony where God did snatch people from the earth. And that does stand as a testimony that God can do that. God has done that. And if that's what he's promising me, I can believe that and ought to believe that. And so where I don't make an illustration of the rapture back there with Enoch, it does let me know, just as the day that a whirlwind came and took Elijah away, that God has taken people from this earth. And for us to see that there's a time in which we're going to be caught up to meet the Lord in the air, whether we're alive or dead, we're just going to go boom in a hundredth of a second. There is testimony in Scripture that God has done that, and then certainly he can do it again. So we do look forward to be raptured out, but the nation of Israel is going to need to walk by faith through the tribulation. Any last question, statement? Oh, for you. Well, no, they're just the body of Moses, that Moses died. But his body was, we just read there where Michael disputed with the devil over his body. So they took his body away of taken alive, right? Yeah, I don't know if another one offhand. Roger? Oh, you mean in the past? Like when the ground swallowed them up? Or you talking about in the future when... Yeah, so the future. Yeah. Sue? Well, yeah, see what I've heard that back in Bible college, Dr. Cameron, Pastor Jordan. Pastor Jordan points out the name Selah at the end of Methuselah, and you'll see that Selah throughout the Psalms, and a lot of times it's a psalm about the second coming of Christ, which he says means like he shall come or it shall come. Selah, it shall come. It's a prophecy about the second coming. Well, Methuselah, you got some math there and everything else, but anyhow, mine is just seeing that it did happen that way. And by faith, Enoch was told something, and it does seem to match that. And so that's why I believe it, even though I can't work the definition out just in a flat-out book. His name means this.
I have a hard time when I read this. Saying, how many people could have possibly been on the earth at that time? I think we've talked about this before. Because Cain was worried that people were going to slay him because of what he did. But how many people? Well,
see, it says in a process of time.
And I've got that on
okay.
Because I've read that.
If Adam lived and didn't even die for 930 years, some of these guys are waiting till almost 200 years old to have kids, but we're even told they do have other kids than are just mentioned here. Well, say you have kids between 200 and 700 years old. It takes 9 months to have a kid. How many kids can you have? There could be 1 million people on earth by the time Noah come along. And you think about just the natural reproduction and give every 5 years they have a child. You still come up with thousands and thousands.
I guess then what you're saying is that Adam could have had many other children.
Oh,
and the Lord,
chapter 5.
It was necessary to mention their name.
Oh yeah, no, you got the statement. Chapter 5. Yeah, okay. Yeah, but Genesis chapter 5, and then we got to close here. It says, verse 4, all the days of Adam after he begot Seth were 800 years, and he begot sons and daughters.
Right.
So he lived 930 total. He begot sons and daughters in that whole time. So if Cain waits to be 100 years old before he gets married, Adam's already had a whole bunch of children by then. So he's got a wife to pick from, and there's a family settling down. Let me close. Oh, okay. Yeah. So it wouldn't even take a whole lot of people to scare him out of the area. Yeah, good point. All right, let's close in prayer. Our God and our Father, I thank you for the interest of each here. Father, we thank you for your word. It is more precious as we study it. And certainly the things that happened years ago are not just there as stories to tell our children about, but, Father, they're guide to life, what faith is all about, how we can please you, even warnings about future judgment that is yet to come. We thank you that your Bible is alive, that it is practical for the day in which we live in, as well as for all eternity. And Father, we thank you that it makes so clear the gift of eternal life that's through Jesus Christ our Lord. We thank you for that gift of salvation and offer our thanks in his name. Amen.